We have all this veneration for the Constitution. It's good to have a Constitution, which is, you know, a slap in the face to the British. They don't have a damn Constitution. They call themselves a democracy. How can you be a democracy if you don't have a Constitution? Unfortunately, our Constitution has a lot of racist shit, a lot of backwards, dumb shit in it. The fifth sentence of the U.S. Constitution is racist as fuck. The fifth sentence. So it's, you know, the fifth paragraph because they're long-ass sentences, but the fifth sentence is the 3/5 clause when they're apportioning how many people are counted to eventually for the House, the apportionment for the House. So an independent candidate for president, I kind of buried the lead to this last time, but I want to just say it very clearly and at the very beginning. So there's only two things that Ralph Nader needed to do in order to have won the presidency in 2000. And it's the same thing in 2004, but 2000 was such a close election. Only 5 Electoral College votes was the difference between Baby Bush and Al Gore, 271 to 266. And you have to secure a majority. You have to get 270. If you don't get 270, then, you know, you have to get the majority. You got to get 50% plus 1. You can't just win with the plurality. If you only win 40%, so that's what happened in 1824 with Andrew Jackson. He won the Electoral College vote. He won the national vote, but he lost the presidency because of the House Runoff Election. If there's no majority in the Electoral College, that triggers what they call a contingent election, but it's a runoff election. It's the second election after, it's actually the third election, right? You got the people's election, then you get the Electoral College election, and if the Electoral College can't decide, then you take the top 3 candidates from the Electoral College vote, and the House of Representatives votes on it. So it's possible for the presidential election of the United States of America to go into 3 different rounds. It already has done it 3 different times, twice with the president, once with different rules before the 12th Amendment, and then the other one was for the vice president. So 3 times we've had the House or the Senate. That runoff election was triggered because there was no outright majority winner in the presidential or the vice presidential race. Now, Ralph Nader could have won 2000 if he would have taken any of the states of the Republican candidate of Baby Bush. Baby Bush only won by 2, and so if he would have taken any of those red states away from Baby Bush, he would have got 3rd place because nobody else got any other votes except for Bush and Gore. So if he would have got those 8 Electoral College votes from Colorado, that would have put him in 3rd place, and it would have deprived Baby Bush of all his not only majority, but he would have lost to Al Gore. And that's all Ralph Nader had to do in order to have a chance at the presidency. Just win Colorado. Just win one state. Colorado loved Nader anyways, but he didn't win it outright. You had a lot of different, throughout history, you had George Wallace, you had Teddy Roosevelt, Abraham Lincoln actually took the presidency, so third parties can, you know, win the entire enchilada, the whole the chief magistrate, the presidency. But typically, third parties, independents, it's more of a long shot because they don't have the machine and they're not as entrenched, and then there's just this horrible propaganda campaign against them as if they're just crazy, egotistical, you know, they're just doing it for their own. So anyways, all Ralph Nader has to do, and all the Green Party has to do, or the Libertarian Party has to do, now, in 2019, is to prepare to win 1 or 2 or 3 states throughout the United States. Get enough Electoral College votes to get third place, and then the other thing that you got to do is deprive all the candidates of a majority. There is 538 electors in the Electoral College. It's been 538 for the past 50, 60 years, I think since 1961. So you got 538 electors, 270 is the outright simple majority, the majority. So if you have 4 candidates and, you know, you get the plurality, you get 40%, that's not 270. You got to get 270 in order to get a majority. That's how democracies work. So that's all Ralph Nader had to do, just win Colorado or any of the other, you know, 20 or 30 red Republican states in the 2000 election. Just take one or two, just take one state, any state from Bush, then Ralph Nader would have triggered that House runoff election, and then the House of Representatives would have to choose between the top 3. And I think it would be easy to make a case that the independent can unite the country because they, you know, don't have they're not biased. So they could just independently lead the nation, whereas if you pick the Republican or the Democrat, that's a partisan issue. You know, half the country already hates. So I think you can make a very simple argument to say that Ralph Nader would have been, you know, an incredible-ass president over Al Gore and over Baby Bush. And, you know, make that argument across the board with 2004, 2008, 2012. So let's get into a little bit of the history. We had 3 elections, right? So 3 contingent, 3 House, 2 House runoff elections, and 1 Senate runoff election because it was for the Vice President. So this is so crazy, this Electoral College. If the Vice President, there's no majority victor in the Vice Presidential race, it goes to the Senate. If there's no majority in the presidential race, it goes to the House. So the 3 House runoff contingent elections was in 1800, 1824, and 1836. The 1800 election was Thomas Jefferson actually was pitted against his own vice presidential pick, Aaron Burr. So before they didn't run as a ticket, they all run together, and when they all counted the votes, Thomas Jefferson had 73 votes and Aaron Burr had 73. So he tied with his own vice president, and then the opposition, John Adams, had 63. So John Adams was clearly the loser, but now Thomas Jefferson had to run against his own vice presidential pick, and then eventually he wins that. It had different election rules. The 12th Amendment changed the Electoral College rules after the 1800 debacle, so I don't think it's really relevant to compare and contrast, except for just to know that it was a contingent election. It did go to the House, and the House decided that Thomas Jefferson should be the president, not Aaron Burr. 1824, this is the one time that the House of Representatives with the current law had chose the president. So this is, you know, amazing. This is incredible. Andrew Jackson gets the majority of the vote. That's happened several times. You've had Rutherford B. Hayes. He wins even though he didn't win the majority. Donald Trump won without winning the majority. Baby Bush won without winning the majority. So this has happened about 5 or 6 times in U.S. history. But Andrew Jackson didn't just win the popular vote, he also won the Electoral College vote. But again, you have to win the majority. And back then, 260 was the total, so he needed 131, but he only won 99. Andrew Jackson, 99. John Quincy, 84. William H. Crawford, 41. And then Henry Clay, 37. He's 4th place. Henry Clay is the loser. William H. Crawford. Now, who the fuck is William H. Crawford? Well, that's our Ralph Nader. That's our Cynthia McKinney. That's our Jill Stein. So William H. Crawford is the 3rd place finisher. So he was presented before the House of Representatives along with John Quincy Adams and Andrew Jackson. And there is some shuffling in the background. Essentially, what is said, and I think it's actually probably on the up and up, but Henry Clay, he gets selected to be Secretary of State by John Quincy Adams later, so they call this a corrupt bargain. And I can understand why Andrew Jackson's supporters would be hopping mad and pissed the fuck off, but they didn't read the Constitution good enough. So Andrew Jackson was popular, but he didn't know the damn rules, and the Constitution says it goes to the House because he didn't get a majority. So what happened behind the scenes was Henry Clay was the loser, but he had, you know, popular support, so he was also, I think, a rep, and so he used his influence to throw his supporters behind John Quincy Adams, and then when he did that, that put John Quincy Adams over the top. On the first ballot of the House of Representatives, John Quincy Adams wins 13 states, because each of the reps don't get one vote, just the state of that entire delegation. So that delegation's got to figure out if it's going to be unanimous, simple majority, plurality. I would shoot for unanimous. If we're all going to vote for Colorado, then all the reps should be on the same page and vote for one individual candidate. John Quincy Adams got 13 states, and then Andrew Jackson got 7 states, and William H. Crawford got 4. So Crawford was still pretty popular, right? He got a shit ton of Electoral College votes, and then he got some House votes too. In spite of this really being a race between Andrew Jackson and John Quincy Adams, Crawford made, a respectable showing, and I bet you the issues that William H. Crawford were putting forth were also talked about by Andrew Jackson and John Quincy Adams. So that's how John Quincy Adams becomes president in 1824, essentially robbing Andrew Jackson not of his Electoral College vote, but of his popular vote too. 1836 is the last time we had a contingent election, and this is going to be the vice presidential election. There's Virginia. All 23 faithless electors in Virginia refused to vote for Martin Van Buren's vice presidential nominee, Richard Minton Johnson. And he's the Kentuckian who claimed to kill Tecumseh. So 1836, right, he's the big, bloody shirt of the War of 1812, which we tied, denied him the majority. So by all of Virginia, all of the Electoral College electors of Virginia, all 23, refused to vote for essentially the guy that won. And so then the Senate runoff election was kicked in and triggered, and then they ultimately elected him in the vice presidential contingent election. So Johnson ran against Francis Granger, and within one single ballot, 33 senators to 16, Johnson won. So Richard Minton Johnson eventually got to be the vice president for Martin Van Buren anyways. But Virginia, a last-ditch effort, they did not like that motherfucker. They did not like Richard Minton Johnson, which he's the piece of shit that, he claimed to kill Tecumseh, and then he got into politics, waving the flag. Tecumseh is one of the greatest Americans ever. So those are the 3 House runoff contingent elections. There is something I was wanting to mention earlier, something crazy about the Electoral College. So, it's a temporary thing, and then it dissolves, and then it goes to the House or the Senate. What happens if the presidential election isn't determined by the House after, 10, 20 votes? What happens come Inauguration Day? January 20th is when the old president quits and the new president comes in. If we don't have a president chosen by noon on January 20th, with the Electoral College, and then it triggered a House election, and the House, they had to pick a majority, so they got to get a simple majority, so they had to jockey for, all this power, 13, so out of 24, so that's, substantial. You got 3 candidates, and you have to get the simple majority of all the states from the House of Representatives. If the House runoff election is triggered because there's no majority victor in the Electoral College, then it could go on and on. They could keep on voting, and then they don't decide. What happens is on January 20th, the vice president becomes the president. So if you don't figure out who the next president is going to be, then it would be, if the decision was between Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump and Ralph Nader for 2020, and nobody can make a decision, Mike Pence is going to become the president. And so that seems, crazy to me. Why not just, randomly pick a person out of the United States, random citizen. Use the draft. If you are, forced to sign a draft, so you have to go fight and die as soon as they say, hey, you piece of shit, go be cannon fodder for a bunch of rich oil fucking tycoons. Go risk your life for empire. Go create a bunch of Venezuelan terrorists by invading their country to steal their oil. Again. So, a little bit more history. 2016, you had Evan McMullen was on the ballot. He wanted to take Utah. That was his state. So if he took Utah, that would give him 6 Electoral College votes. that would have been enough in 2000. Yeah, I think Utah probably went to Baby Bush. He took Utah. Evan McMullen would have won, or would have got a chance to win in the House runoff election if he would have ran in 2000. A lot of people have, throughout history, it's not just George Wallace, Teddy Roosevelt is actually the biggest, I guess, loser, right? So Abraham Lincoln took the presidency. So an independent third-party candidate can take the entire, the whole fucking thing. But Teddy Roosevelt, he got 88 electoral votes. He ran as a progressive party. John Breckinridge got 72 electoral college votes. George Wallace, 46. So he's in recent memory. But Teddy Roosevelt, 88 electoral votes. I don't know, was it not close? How did that not trigger a runoff election in 1912? John Bell in 1860, he got 39 electoral college votes. He ran under the Constitutional Union Party. Strom Thurmond, he ran as a states' rights Dixiecrat in 1948. He got 39 electoral college votes. Now, Baby Bush wasn't the closest election. The 1876 election, Rutherford B. Hayes versus Samuel Tilden. Hayes v. Tilden. Tilden v. Hayes. And Tilden lost. And then that's when the end of Reconstruction happened too. Because the corrupt bargain that was made was they let the opposition get their candidate, but as long as they would end the occupation. And so Rutherford B. Hayes is going to win the election by 1 electoral college vote. 1. Just 1. So 1876 is very close. 2000 is very close. If John Bell, Strom Thurmond, George Wallace, John Breckinridge, Teddy Roosevelt, if Nader would have got Colorado, if Evan McMullen would have got Utah in 2000 or 1876, that would have triggered a House runoff election. They would have had a chance, a good chance. Because without, an outright victory, this is the only way that the third parties really have in order to be the victor, to be a dark horse candidate, essentially. They were there the whole time. People knew about them. And then the House of Representatives is faced with the choice. I think that it would have been a very good argument. I loved Jill Stein. She only got 1% across the nation. But if she would have got one state, then it would have been versus Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump, or Jill Stein. And it would have been the House of Representatives, the outgoing House of Representatives. So not the new people that was elected, but the old House of Representatives would then decide between those three candidates. Most of America did not like their candidates. They hated the other one more. And so their unfavorables were higher than their favorables, which means that most people hated Hillary and they hated Donald. And so they had some core supporters, but most of the people were voting against the other person. What do you want, Donald to be president? What do you want, Hillary to be president? So since everybody hated both of these candidates, Jill Stein wasn't hated. She wasn't just, detested. It wasn't just like, oh my God, the Democrats actually had more of a problem with Jill than the Republicans. But I think it'd been a good argument. Jill Stein would have been a great fucking leader. All you need is a policy guru. She could sign the laws. That's all the executive is they sign the laws, and then they make sure that they get enforced. She would have provided the vision. She would have provided all the policy. Jill Stein would have been an incredible president. So if the House runoff election was triggered, and then Ralph Nader is presented before House, and it's Gore or Bush or Nader, clearly it would be Nader, would it not? Clearly. So that's some history there. The 1876 election by 1 electoral college vote. 1. So if any of those people, again, George Wallace, Teddy Roosevelt, John Bell, Strom Thurmond, John Breckinridge, Ralph Nader, if he would have won Colorado, Evan McMullen, if he would have won Utah, then he would have had a chance to become president. So that's the pathway. That's the pathway for a Green Party, a charismatic independent, to be able to capture the presidency. Win 1, 2, 3. Try to get as many states as you can. But if you see one state that's loving you by like 20%, shut all the other operations in all the other states and just focus on that one state. Once you get the majority in that one state, the polls are saying this is your state, then look at the rest of the states. But that's essentially what the third-party independents would have to do. Get enough electoral college votes to win third place and then deprive everybody else of gaining an outright simple majority. So, I guess I'll just read off these 11 red plus Bernie Sanders states. I think these are ripe because there's no opposition party. There's no opposition party in the 20 safe Democrat states or the 24 safe Republican states. So in the safely Republican states, the Democratic Party is just a bunch of eunuchs. They don't have no backbone. They don't have no fucking heart. They're not the opposition. They're not standing up and speaking up for what's right. They're not winning elections. They're a bunch of fucking losers. And for whatever fucking reason, they're just not good enough. They're not effective. They don't have the balls. They don't have the testicular or the ovarian fortitude. So there's no opposition party in the 24 safe Republican states. There was a bunch of Bernie Sanders states over Hillary states. So there's 11 when you combine the Bernie Sanders states with the red states. These states don't have a Democrat party, and so these states are ripe for a Green Party. They're open to Bernie Sanders. Now, you could look at it two different ways. The Bernie Sanders people might look at the Green Party as, you know, challengers, and they probably should because they'd be fighting and competing for the same votes. So it could turn out just, hey, I'm voting for my candidate, fuck you. But I feel that the Hillary Clinton states, like California voted for Hillary over Bernie. The Deep South voted for Hillary, and that makes sense because she's a right-wing, racist, you know, piece of shit. So, of course, the Deep South is going to vote for the conservative, racist, bigot, you know, piece of shit. So I feel like with the Hillary Clinton states, I don't know how do you unwrap that fucking insanity. The Hillary Clinton states are the ones that are in most need of help, and so maybe they're ready to, you know, finally be woken up and actually do something differently. But what I'm saying is because Bernie was elected in Wyoming, West Virginia, Utah, Oklahoma, North Dakota, Nebraska, Montana, Kansas, Indiana, Idaho, and Alaska. And all these states are Republican states. That means Bernie Sanders has a good chance. He's a different kind of Democrat. And the Green Party are typically your liberals, right? So the Green Party would also, there's progressive-minded people. There's progressive-minded people who's waiting for a strong candidate, a strong opposition candidate in Wyoming, West Virginia, Utah, Oklahoma, North Dakota, Nebraska, Montana, Kansas, Indiana, Idaho, and Alaska. So West Virginia would vote for an independent candidate. West Virginia would vote for the Green Party candidate. You could focus on winning West Virginia. That might be the first state you would want to focus on. That's 5 Electoral College votes. Montana also was a Ralph Nader state. It was one of the top, you know, over 5% states. And Alaska. So there's something going on in Alaska. There's something going on in Montana. They're run by a bunch of fucking Republicans. The Democrats are completely irrelevant. And so that's why they look at Nader and they look at Bernie Sanders and they say, finally, we got somebody that's actually going to champion the people, somebody that's strong enough to stand up to the Republican cabal. So I think those 11 red Bernie states are perfect for a charismatic independent to focus on, especially the Green Party. The Libertarians might want to do the exact opposite, go for the blue, I don't know is it Trump the populist? Who would be the populist in the Republicans? Maybe Gary Johnson? I don't know. So, yeah. That's how Ralph Nader could have won in 2000. That's how the third party can win in 2020, 2024. As long as the Electoral College is still here in play, then they can win enough Electoral College votes to deprive both of them of a majority victor, and then make sure they get enough Electoral College votes, EC votes, right? It's easier, quicker to say. I'm sick of saying that Electoral College, so the EC votes... as long as they get third place and deprive everybody else of 270 winners, that triggers a House Runoff Election, and then they can win it in the House. So, in the third election, right? Third parties can win it in the third election. So there you have it. That's how the Green Party can take 2020. And we need someone else besides Jill. Jill is wonderful. I love Jill. But 1%, for some reason, her sweet delicateness is just not radiating across the nation. Very smart, very intelligent. I thought she's a revolutionary princess, a revolutionary goddess. She just says, well, the military-industrial complex has been out of control. She essentially says revolutionary shit She's a Che Guevara with a nice femininity. She's Che Guevara with femininity. And probably AOC and Tulsi is too. So, John Masters, McGody. Peace.